The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
We are those guys. We hope to be your guys, bringing you our special recap of the NFL draft. It is Friday night. Day 2 has just ended, and I'm here with Nick Ferguson to tell you how your teams did in a vacuum with half of the draft left to go, but some excitement certainly going on Thursday and Friday. Hey, what's going on with you, Nick Ferguson?
Hey, man, it's always a fun time this time of the year. A lot of fans are going to be happy, but then there's going to be a boatload who are going to be upset because the team did not do exactly as they thought the team should have done. But it's been a great draft thus far. Still some more information and a lot of things out there for a lot of players as another day of activity is set to take place.
Well, we haven't talked to each other since before the draft began. And I know it's, at this point, we're trying to let the last 24 hours sink in with 6 teams in the top 12 picks selecting a quarterback. That's certainly going to be the headline. The past 2 seasons in the NFL, more quarterbacks are playing, whether due to injury or incompetency, because it's always the player's fault when the production doesn't show up on the field. That's what Nick Ferguson always says. But, it's always, smokescreen time when we talk about the media narrative of pushing up quarterbacks and hitting the reset button on the franchise. And I truly believed that that's why we would see like Will Levis sliding to the second round last year when he was in the conversation for the number 2 pick. And yet we have 6 quarterbacks, as I mentioned, in the top 12. Pretty routine, right? Caleb Williams, first overall to Chicago, something that other teams knew months in advance. And weeks in advance, the Commanders were set to take Jaden Daniels out of LSU. At least that's what Elliott Wolf said. And the New England Patriots taking Drake May out of North Carolina, 3rd overall. It was pretty chalky, right? Jim Harbaugh talking about offensive linemen, so they get to take Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. I did skip Marvin Harrison to the Cardinals, and so on and so forth. But then the Atlanta Falcons are on the clock, Nick Ferguson, and that is when things got absolutely crazy there in Detroit.
Yeah, they did. I didn't understand this move, just like so many other people, as we were trying to understand what was the purpose or the mission of Terry Fontenot and the Atlanta Falcons. You had spent so much money on Kirk Cousins, who has long tenure in this league, but he really hasn't lived up to a lot of those expectations. And I said this before, he's played in the same system for 12 years. And I thought it was kind of a brash move. And that's when the draft was kind of thrown on its ears, because at that point, it was like, okay, well, a lot of top players still on the board, a lot of great talented players still on the board. But that move right there kind of shook everything up. And it shaped what happened with the Denver Broncos, what happened with the Raiders. The Jets moved back, allowed the Minnesota Vikings to move up. And that was kind of the idea going in, because the draft pretty much to that point, Alex, it was going exactly how everyone had thought it would go. But it's always a wild card. It was the Falcons, and it changed the trajectory of the draft, forcing the Broncos to say, hey, listen, we were thinking about moving back, but with the Raiders behind us, we have to take both Knicks, which forced the Raiders to take the best player available, and that was Brock Bowers.
Now, we're talking about Michael Penix out of Washington going 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons. As you said, Nick, the Falcons had just spent, they handed out a $180 million contract for Kirk Cousins, $100 million of that guaranteed. So the project, I guess, that Michael Penix now is, there's a lot of, making sure that we have a competent backup, and we want to be able to groom somebody. That's the goal at which Terry Fontenot said when he introduced the draft picks on Thursday night. And, we all want to be the Green Bay Packers. We want to instill stability and ensure that our fan base has someone that's always competent, able to right the ship. And after picking in the top 10 for now 4 straight years and using them on 4 offensive players, they're assuming that with Kirk Cousins, they're not going to have an opportunity to take a talent that Michael Penix is ever again. And you can't just call yourselves the Green Bay Packers for a number of reasons. Number one, Terry Fontenot is entering year 4, and as I just mentioned, they picked in the top 10 the last 4 years. There's no
Right.
guarantee that by the time that this ship is righted and they do anything better than 10, 11 wins, if Kirk Cousins is capable of that, that Terry Fontenot is still there when Michael Penix is ready to go. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, all on rookie contracts. And who's to say that when Michael Penix's number is called, that those guys are still going to be there because they all have to get long-term deals done. Terry Fontenot's takeaway from this was, like the Green Bay Packers, we have the ability to have him gain experience on the bench, and that it would be a good problem to have if it's 4 or 5 years from now and Michael Penix still hasn't played. I understand in drafting a quarterback 8th overall. I understand in paying $100 million to a free agent quarterback. I don't understand both of them in sequence, both of these decisions being made. Now, you can't tell me that they were ready to hand Kirk Cousins the money knowing that they were targeting a quarterback at 8th overall. They didn't even have Michael Penix visit the facility as a top 30. So at some point after they signed Kirk Cousins, they made the determination and decision that Penix was someone that they had to have. And that is an absolute indictment on the job that is being performed and understanding the goals of either winning now or building for the future. You can't just try to do both, Nick. You can't just half-bake both ends of this.
Well, that is what Terry Fontenot is planning on, as he's done thus far, telling the fan base. That is what I was thinking. I was trying to channel my inner Brian Gutekunst and the Green Bay Packers and making this type of decision. I think Ron Wolf was the GM there when you had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers.
That's right.
But this only works out if you have a viable option as your number one. And the reason it worked out for the Packers because you had Brett Favre, who is a Hall of Fame player who was playing well, and you bring in Aaron Rodgers as Aaron Parent, and he has to sit for a while. But the biggest part of that is both Aaron and Brett Favre were healthy. They were not coming off of a massive surgery. And when you look at the Falcons and what they're trying to do, it is the idea of you're trying to save face because it appears as though maybe Penix wasn't on their radar, but they saw him still sitting there, and Fontenot thought to himself, what would happen if he had a quarterback in waiting? And there is a possibility, Alex, that he might have had a little buyer's remorse when it came to Kirk Cousins, knowing so with all the young players you just mentioned, you throw a young quarterback in that mix that you don't have to pay right away because you have that 5th-year option. So now the Falcons find themselves in quite a conundrum because just think about it like this. If you are Kirk Cousins, granted, you got $108 million guaranteed, but they go and draft a quarterback in the first round at your position. And Penix is like 24. So 4 years from now, he's going to be 28. And if the idea is Kirk's going to play a lengthy period of time, Falcons fans are not going to see their aging young quarterback until years later. And then the Falcons are going to be in a situation where they have to determine, are they going to give, a la the Green Bay Packers, looking at Jordan Love, what are they going to do with his 5th-year option? So you're going to give a guy a huge payday that you haven't even seen him play in meaningful games? This is one of the more baffling decisions that I've seen in the front office in a long time.
I mean, Jordan Love, 26th overall pick, Jalen Hurts, 52nd overall pick, and they were 21, 22 years old, respectively. 8th overall pick, and Penix is 24 years old in 2 weeks. You can say it's been 2 years since he suffered the season-ending injuries, right? He's been healthy for 2 years at Washington. But if Kirk Cousins is 35 now and 36 when the season opens, and they're guaranteeing him money through his age 37 season, you're right. The best bet is that he's going to be 26 years old the first time he takes the field. And at 27, with 1 year starter experience under his belt, they have to make that decision if he's really the answer at quarterback. And it's just so hard for me to believe that this is, this is a sustainable situation where you have stability and Terry Fontenot is still going to be there, that all those offensive playmakers are still going to be there. Meanwhile, asking yourself, hey, the Falcons defense was pretty abysmal and they completely failed to address it with that top pick. The other way we can talk about this, I think we're going to start with the first round. And since we're here on Friday night, Nick, I will mention that the Falcons did address their defense by adding 2 pieces on the defensive line. Top of the second round at the 35th overall pick, they took Clemson's Brooke Arororo. I'm just going to call him Scooby-Doo.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Right?
Yeah.
And
You know-
right, yeah, you first on the name.
Okay, before we get to the name, here's the one thing that I find very interesting. Because of the conversation we just had about the run on quarterbacks, something that's really historic in the Falcons.
We'll get to the rest of them for sure. I just want to round out kind of team by team,
Okay, well, you know what? I thought the Falcons did try to add some pieces to become much better on the defensive side of the ball. And let's not, be mistaken. Their defense played better than I anticipated last year.
That's
So
true.
once again, you add more defensive pieces, you figure as though in the division where Tampa Bay is your biggest threat because they went to the playoffs at 9-8, once again, helping either your aging quarterback in Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, if he can come in and take over or overtake Kirk Cousins, that would be a great mixture in the combination right there, offensive and defensive.
Well, the defense was, you're right, an absolute masterclass. They were putting, the pass rush has always eluded them to a certain extent, but they were still getting the job done with Calais Campbell, and rightfully so. Ryan Nielsen was rewarded taking over in Jacksonville as the DC. Meanwhile, Washington defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake comes in, which is kind of why, I was on the fence. I was like, well, Leatu Latu, was playing for Jimmy Lake. So Lake either knows and loves what he's seen out of him versus, well, he watched him get medically, taken out of football, which is why the 3rd round pick of Braylon Trice out of Washington is the piece that makes sense. Coming off the defensive line, 7 sacks in his redshirt senior year, and 3rd team All-American, 1st team All-Pac-12 is just, a perfect fit for a Jimmy Lake defense that takes over and a player like Trice filling in some familiarity. So they upgrade the pass rush to a certain extent, not that elite talent that we were looking for, maybe 8 overall. But Nick, we had a run, an NFL record 14 first-round picks, all on the offensive side of the football. And because of what the Falcons decided to do at the 8th overall selection, it moves us down to the Vikings having to trade up, swapping places with the New York Jets so they could land J.J. McCarthy at 10th overall. Now, clearly, the offensive playmakers in Minnesota is one of the few situations for a rookie quarterback that's better than what we saw in Atlanta. So J.J. McCarthy with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson probably coming back after missing the first month or so recovering from surgery, and some talented offensive line. What do you think about the spot for J.J. McCarthy sliding into Kevin O'Connell's offense?
I like it because all you have to do is think about the guy we were just talking about, Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins thrived in that offense. And you look at J.J. McCarthy and what he was asked to do in Michigan, but more importantly, what he was not asked to do. And he did that part very well. And this is why when you look at the Minnesota Vikings and how they're set up, at the wide receiver position with Jefferson and Addison, and then they bring over Aaron Jones from the rival Green Bay Packers, it makes life easier for J.J. McCarthy. It's sort of like being at Michigan all over again, if you really think about it, because the whole idea is that, when these quarterbacks go off the board, every fan base is thinking, okay, well, these guys are Superman. But Superman can't do anything without the Justice League. So it's all about putting that team around him and learning how to function within the framework of that team. And just think about the system that Kevin O'Connell comes from. It's the same system that Zach Taylor is running. Brian Callahan is running. Robert Saleh, they're running a version of it with Nathaniel Hackett with the Green Bay Packers. Sean McVay is running. Matt McDaniels is running. You see the common thread here. So the whole idea is put the quarterback in a position where they don't really have to do that much. All you have to do is find an open receiver and give him the freaking ball. It was a staple of the West Coast offense for so many years, right? That's why San Francisco 49ers back in the day when Bill Walsh was running it, you had Steve Young and you had Joe Montana. Those quarterbacks were so efficient in the offense, and it's about pacing. It's all about establishing somewhat of a rhythm. And J.J. McCarthy showed that at Michigan that he can do that. So this offense will fit well for him with the Vikings.
And the Vikings weren't done there. We were maybe assuming they'd have to package 11 and 23 to move up to get a Drake May or even a J.J. McCarthy, but they didn't have to do that, which allowed them to then make a move later in the first round to go up and get one of those falling defensive players and arguably one of the best edge talents in this draft class, Dallas Turner. They swapped with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So here was the move, right? The rub is they moved up to 23 and gave up significant draft capital to do so with the Houston Texans. So you pair that with the trade to go from 23 to 17, and ultimately they got Dallas Turner and the number 230 and the 232 pick from Jacksonville. In return, they gave up 42nd overall, two fifth rounders this year, plus a second, third, and fourth round selection in 2025. But for a guy who physically, as the numbers say, and as some of the film says, it looks like they've got in Dallas Turner someone that could favorably compare to physically as someone you're very familiar with in Von Miller.
Well, here's the interesting part about it. I mean, when Brian Flores came in and took over that Vikings defense, to me, they were underperforming. And under his tutelage, they surprised a lot of people with what they were doing. And knowing as though when you watch how this league is set up, and all we have to do is look at the first couple of rounds of this year's draft, everyone is pushing their chips to the center of the table, banking on those quarterbacks. So Brian Flores, being is a guy that you're familiar with, coming from that Bill Belichick tree,
absolutely.
With the Patriots, it's all about defense. So when other teams are going out grabbing wide receivers and grabbing quarterbacks, you need something to neutralize those particular players on offense. And the best way to kind of balance the playing field is adding guys who can really get after the quarterback. So we're going to have to wait to see how this kind of pans out for Minnesota. But if you are a Vikings fan, you have to be happy. You have your quarterback of the future, and you have a guy on the defense, a young guy at that, on the defensive side of the ball.
Two of their biggest needs, of course, quarterback. And after essentially swapping places, Danielle Hunter going to Houston, Jonathan Greenard coming to Minnesota, adding the edge was the next most important thing for them at quarterback. And as you said, pushing all the chips in, no day two selections for them. So we'll see how they can fill out the rest of the talent in Minnesota with a really feisty NFC North, which brings me to, again, McCarthy with the 10th pick. But let's go back one selection because, correct me if I'm wrong, the Chicago Bears, who came in with 4 draft selections, right? Just 4 total picks. They picked up Caleb Williams first overall and Roma Dunze falling to them at 9th overall. Would you say that as far as day one, even through the first couple of days of the round, the Chicago Bears, Super Bowl champions, right, Nick?
No, they're not Super Bowl champions. And I wouldn't even go as far as to say, well, they won the draft. But here's what I would look at and say, that they've added some nice pieces, complementary pieces, and they set up Caleb Williams, a number 1 draft choice, to be effective and efficient early. I just wish that they would have done the same thing, taken the same philosophy with Justin Fields, but they didn't. But when you look at what Caleb Williams has as his offense, you got Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett as his tight end.
I love how you're leading off with that position group. Now get to the receivers, please.
You're right. Then you talk about Keenan Allen. You're not a very fast guy, but he is by far the best route running receiver in the league. And I would put his route running up against any other wide receiver. You got DJ Moore, as I mentioned, and DeAndre Swift as a running back. I mean, is it USC all over again for Caleb Williams? The idea is that, hey, how can this kid fail with so much talent around him? And the reason I started with the tight ends, because usually the tight ends really get no love, right? And these are the guys that make life easy for a quarterback because they attack the middle of the field, right between the hashes, and they make the linebackers have to honor all the underneath passes. But those safeties have to make sure they're roaming the field and take away everything between those hashes. And that's a very difficult job, especially you got Gerald Everett, you would look at him as being your move tight end, that you guy. And Cole Kmet, he's not your typical wide tight end. So now you essentially have two move tight ends that can really put pressure vertically on opposing defense. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the NFC North this season.
Well, the Bears rounded things out with their third draft selection. They had the 75th overall pick, spending it on Yale tackle Kieran Amagaji. There we go. I was doing so much better with Anyway, look, they've got their bookend tackles, Braxton Jones, who they found a diamond in the rough in the 5th round, I think a couple of years ago, and then Darnell Wright, last year's 9th overall selection. So a nice depth piece with experience at tackle and at guard. It's just the kind of thing that you need to insulate and keep Caleb Williams, your prized possession, upright. And again, we're not going to see the Chicago Bears for a while now, so we have to, kind of keep tabs on some of their undrafted free agents to fill out the rest of the roster. And Nick, the moment we've been waiting for, I did pick number 10. I did pick number 9. And so then the Jets get to take their tackle.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the 12th overall selection, the Denver Broncos pick the 6th quarterback in this draft class, with Sean Payton identifying the player that he wanted for his offense. That, let's just put it this way, the last quarterback taken 6th overall, the last 6th quarterback taken in the first round was Dan Marino with the 26th overall selection in 1983. So tell me how this is going to work out better for Denver than it did for the Dolphins back in 83.
Here's what I don't like. The way that you set that up, saying the sixth quarterback.
I mean, let me start over. Adam Schefter tweeted on the night of the draft, Sean Payton wanted and intended to draft Patrick Mahomes in the 2017 draft, wherein he held the 11th overall pick. He was ready to turn in the card, but before he could, the Chiefs traded up to the Bills' spot at number 10 and took Mahomes one spot before Payton got him, leaving the Saints to draft Ohio State cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. But catching strays, weird. Payton feels as strongly about Bo Nix as he did Patrick Mahomes.
Well, you know what? That says a lot, because so many people, hindsight being 2020, after watching Patrick Mahomes perform in his young career, they all say, well, we could have taken, even Kyle Shanahan said himself, Kyle was searching and hoping to land Kirk Cousins, that he didn't even do an evaluation on Patrick Mahomes. How crazy is that? And right. Patrick Mahomes has beaten him twice in the Super Bowl. So I'll let people marinate on that for just a second. But I'm okay with what the Broncos did at the quarterback position.
You are.
Now, I'll tell you this. I was at the Broncos draft party, and the moment the Vikings moved up and selected J.J. McCarthy, you heard a lot of mixed reviews, because there was this deep gas, and it was just like, oh no, they didn't get the Christmas gift that they were hoping they received. But here's the thing that I try to tell the fans. First, you complain that the Broncos didn't draft over the past couple of years their future quarterback. So they're sitting at 12, they draft their future quarterback, and you still have issues. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So I said, to hell with those people. So be happy that the Broncos did, in fact, get a quarterback of the future, a guy who has experience. Now, let's talk about the experience just a little. People have complained of that. Well, Bo Nix is like 23, 24. He played so much football and he's too old. The whole idea is that when we look at quarterbacks, we always hear this idea of God being NFL ready, even though the guy has yet to play a game, take a snap in the NFL. Let's be totally honest about that.
Right.
But I do feel that experience does play a role, Alex, because how quickly can a guy learn and off? How quickly can he process information? How quickly can he get over a mistake? But more importantly, can a college kid come in and lead a bunch of grown men that have mortgages to pay? Now, we don't really know that right away about any of these quarterbacks, but you hope the level of experience and the system they played in kind of play a role. But I really like what the Broncos have done because now we get a chance to see a couple of things. The biggest thing is who's going to elevate their level of play in that quarterback role. You have Ben DiNucci, you have Jarrett Stidham, you have Zach Wilson, and now you have Bo Nix. And keep this in mind. Bo Nix has a lot of experience, so much experience that guess what? Guess who was in this quarterback room when he was at Auburn? Jarrett Stidham. So that's going to be a real interesting dynamic to see what comes out of that quarterback room and who elevates their level of play.
I go back to, Bo Nix and Patrick Mahomes because of Sean Payton's, let's call it LeBron-like intuition. I'm sure that, hindsight's 2020. And when he was the offensive coordinator of the New York Giants, he's grinding tape and he says, hey, you know what? This Michigan kid, Tom Brady, I think he's my top quarterback. I'm going to give him a first round grade. And then, oh no, he slipped through our hands for 6 rounds. The New England Patriots got him. I'm sure that Sean Payton, when he was the San Diego State running backs coach in the mid 90s, said to himself, there's a quarterback coming out and I have absolutely, no doubt in my mind that the best quarterback that's out there, it just absolutely, it has to be. I can't even name a quarterback from the 90s. I just absolutely blew the bit. This hindsight, like fake intuition, LeBron telling us he vibed with the Migos like 2 years before they put out a single. It kind of stinks for me. It's not really fair to exactly grade yourself and put Bo Nix in the same conversation as one Patrick Mahomes. And then the other Schefter tweet that just absolutely sent me, and which again will link us to Patrick Mahomes. Denver held a private workout for Bo Nix the day after the pro day. The night before the workout, the Broncos sent Nix 3 packets of offensive play installation. And then when they worked with him the next day, he crushed it. So I'd like to turn your attention to a story from, I believe it was ESPN, that during the 2017 draft process, Matt Nagy wanted Mahomes so badly that he gave Mahomes the plays that Andy Reid was going to ask him the night before. And then all of a sudden, here's Mahomes absolutely nailing what Andy Reid is going to go after. It kind of seems like not too far to say that if you were ready for a test and you, oh my gosh, knocked it out of the park, maybe that's not the best way to evaluate your draft process. But again, we still have to see them watch plays. I just kind of look at that room. And again, you said Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix have that familiarity, but they had Jarrett Stidham. They add 2 more quarterbacks. And I feel like Jarrett Stidham is still the front runner to be the starter for the Broncos.
Well, the only reason that Jarrett Stidham might at this moment be the front runner is because he's the one that's most familiar with the offense.
But that's what I mean. If you got a quarterback that was that much more talented, or that we wouldn't be saying this.
Okay, see, think about what you just said.
I know talent. I stopped my I know talent. Man, we're still talking about Jarrett Stidham, and they've added 2 quarterbacks.
Well, because they added those 2 quarterbacks, there's a possibility we won't be talking about Jarrett Stidham that long. Because when a team trades for a guy in your position, and then they double down and draft a guy, and your head coach says, now I got my guy of the future, that means that, your days are really numbered. Because think about last season. I mean, Russell Wilson was sat down after the Patriots game. And we were told that, hey, Jarrett Stidham was going to be the guy, the team still in playoff hunt, and they needed a spark, and Jarrett Stidham was going to be that guy. Remember we were told that?
Yeah, that's what we were told.
Okay, so now, fast forward, things have changed so much because now they not only have one quarterback, they have two quarterbacks, and both of those quarterbacks was, yes, you guessed it, selected and handpicked by Sean Payton. So that means as though no matter how things shake out, no matter what Jarrett Stidham does, Sean wants to make himself look right. If Stidham ends up being a starter, you know how bad that's going to look? That, hey, now Stidham is starting over the two guys that you brought in there. And listen, I get it. I get it. If he starts over Bo Nix, that is something that's expected because Stidham has experience already in this system. But if Stidham gets beaten out by either of those quarterbacks, what does that say about Stidham in the first place and the whole concept that he was going to be the spark?
Exactly. So again, 6 quarterbacks in the first 12 picks. I think it's the third time I've said that. It's just completely unprecedented. And teams are just scared to have to rely on somebody that they don't know is a sure thing. And I thought that the Raiders weren't going to go quarterback just because Gardner Minshew's getting $20 million a year. What I didn't realize is they went Brock Bowers because all the quarterbacks were taken ahead of them. And it doesn't matter that Michael Mayer was a second-round pick just the year before. They went out and got the best player on their board, even if we wanted to say that there were other positions of greater need, right? Almost like it's a luxury pick, given the pieces that they have on that offense and the targets that Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers both merited. However, they rounded things out, adding Jackson Powers Johnson, who they actually listed as a guard when they announced the pick, even though he had played center at Oregon in his lone year starting at an All-American level. And they rounded things out, adding Delmar Glaze, the tackle out of Maryland. And look, they're just fitting in pieces on that offensive line. And they went 3 for 3 on the offensive side of the football, knowing that defense was a huge liability for them. But as far as landing spots go, we weren't talking about Vegas for Brock Bowers, but I'm kind of intrigued with the fit, Nick.
Yeah, I thought before Minnesota moved up and the Jets were on the clock, I immediately said, well, Brock Bowers would fit well with what the Jets trying to do offensively. Once again, thinking about how having a move tight end can actually open things up across the middle of the field for a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. So with the Raiders taking him, look, you already mentioned Myers and you got Devontae Adams. Once again, that was a piece that they were missing, right? How can you affect the defense in a multitude of ways? Mm-hmm. Brock Bowers gives you that because he is one of these modern day type of tight ends. Like, it's not like the tight ends of old, like Mark Bavaro and guys like that, right? You don't have those big body tight ends anymore. Now it's kind of slender wide receiver type. And Brock Bowers was a monster in college at Georgia. Mm-hmm. And I don't mind saying that, even though that was that's something that we cannot say at Georgia Tech, but real recognized real. And when you look at Brock Bowers and what he was able to do in college, he's capable of doing those same things because look what George Kittle was doing with the San Francisco 49ers, TJ Hawkinson. Well, I know some of those are Iowa guys, but the idea is that utilizing the skill set of a guy who is a move tight end, who runs excellent routes and who can run routes like a wide receiver, that's an excellent weapon for Gardner Minshew and the Raiders.
Well, we garnered a ton of attention on the offensive players, and then you started seeing a run on tackles and defensive linemen. I mean, if we go through, the Saints and the Bengals and the Steelers, all getting that offensive line help that they desperately needed. Meanwhile, Colts, and we mentioned the Vikings with Dallas Turner, Jared Verse becoming the first round day one selection for the Rams since Jared Goff in their first year back in LA. Going through that cluster of contending or near playoff teams, and even getting into the wild card type teams. Any additions that you see that you think maybe were the best fit? I mean, we had talked about one end of the trade, but the Jaguars getting a receiver in Brian Thomas Jr. after Calvin Ridley left in free agency. We're talking about a range of players that dropped because of the quarterback selections. And Nick, if you want to point out where one team you think went above and beyond with their draft selection, as opposed to we'll get to the receivers taken at the end of the round shortly here.
Well, I don't want to look at it and say that some, went above and beyond. It was just a matter of with the players that were still on the board. Some who none of us expected to be where they were, teams got to take advantage of it. I was interested in seeing what was going to happen with the slew of Michigan players and Blake Corum being one of those guys. Where would he eventually fall? Who would be willing to take somewhat of a risk on him? And I don't even want to say, I shouldn't have even said risk, but just who was going to select him and would be a great fit. And he's going to an ideal place. I actually thought that his former coach would select it, knowing as though, they don't have the running back that they used to have, who's now
and
with
Austin Eckler.
who's now with the Washington Commanders. So I thought Blake Corum would go to join Justin Herbert with the Chargers, but no, Sean McVay picked him up. So Sean McVay sees in Blake Corum what Kyle Shanahan has with, Christian McCaffrey. So we have to see how that works out. But that was one I was looking forward to, and I was happy that Corum went to a place where an offensive coordinator would know exactly how to use his skill set.
Right, and he joins Kyron Williams, who had a breakout performance but missed 12 games the past 2 seasons. So I understand the depth and the position of need for LA as they sort of insulate. It wasn't a rebuild. They did so well with their later picks in the draft that it was a luxury for them to be able to take an edge rusher and verse, and then following that up with Blake Corum. I'll bring up the corners. I know you are a former member of the secondary. The Eagles and the Lions with their cornerback selections, I think, were the most intriguing for me. The Eagles were absolutely pumped to get Quinyon Mitchell, who, let's just say that the 40 time helped, solidify his first round status. But Terrion Arnold to the Lions, the biggest area of need for Detroit was in that secondary. You watched the shootout that they had against the 49ers. You watched, footballs flying off of helmets that set up game-winning touchdowns to send San Francisco back to the Super Bowl. And Terrion Arnold, I think, was one of my favorite prospects. I don't want to say I did, as much research as anybody, but in understanding the growth that he had as a true freshman starter for Nick Saban, which says a lot, and from his sophomore to junior seasons, he went from 80 targets his sophomore year to just 40. He cut down his targets in half because of the shutdown prowess that he had on the outside. So I'm kind of excited to see what Detroit does, taking advantage of the Dallas Cowboys, who were happy to move down twice and still take a tackle in Tyler Guyton, which was hugely needed, even though he's a bit of a guy that needs to continue learning the position as a former basketball player and tight end. But sticking with the Detroit Lions, Nick, I just really appreciate how he is just able to immediately start, hopefully, and patrolling the outside after the Lions made so many other additions to the front seven, first-round pick with the linebacker position a year ago. This was a huge need that they had in the secondary, and Detroit's a team that was great last year, and they just got better with Arnold, and I'm just looking at their later picks. Oh, that's right, Ennis Rakeshaw, so they went corner, taking the junior out of Mississippi, and no 3rd round selection because they moved up to 24 on Thursday night, Nick. I like what the Lions are doing so far. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, I like what the Lions are doing, and it's interesting that you took it all the way back to the game against San Francisco 49ers when the Detroit Lions had what we thought was going to be a cushion of a lead, but San Francisco was able to take that away with a couple of plays here and there. And knowing their defensive coordinator, because I played with him, Aaron Glenn, going out, and it's no surprise that they wanted to move on the defensive side of the ball. To me, this is why they did that. They know that they're going to have to contend with the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings. So going out there, making sure that you're solid on the edges is going to help that pass rush. That pass rush that I thought played, fairly well last year. But they faltered down the stretch because pressure and coverage in the back end go hand in hand. If you don't have guys who can hold up consistently, not every once in a while, not when you're playing against some of the lower tier teams in the NFL, But if you can do that consistently, it gives you more maneuverability if you are a defensive coordinator. And I know Aaron Glenn, I mean, Aaron wants to play more man-to-man coverage. Some of the guys he had last year, he wasn't able to do that.
Yeah.
And earlier, like a couple of years ago, they went out and made Jeff Okudah one of their top corners out of Ohio State. That didn't work out. Now, Jeff Okudah, I think, is on his third team. So going out there and get guys who you feel as though they possess all the skill set that you want, that level of toughness, that scrappiness, and those guys who can play that sticky coverage out there on the edges, this is going to be a good look for the Detroit Lions, who, in my opinion, they're somewhat situated offensively based on how they're set up, but it is their defense that they needed to rebuild, and I think they did that in the draft.
And rounding out the end of the first round, the receiver position and top of round 2, which began today on Friday, I think you have to highlight Xavier Worthy going to the Kansas City Chiefs, because the Buffalo Bills, who have lost to Kansas City 3 times, were more than happy to move. Xavier Worthy may not be the perfect fit because of the diminutive size and speed that some of their current receivers have, bringing Curtis Samuel along with Khalil Shakir. And they ultimately trade all the way down to 33, trading with Carolina afterwards to take Keon Coleman, who I guess they're going to try to line up outside, even though he was more split outside and in the slot at Florida State. But the fastest player in this draft class, maybe without pads on, I'll just leave that caveat, is going to the Kansas City Chiefs along with Marquise Brown. Kansas City with Xavier Worthy, Ricky Pearsall, who everyone seems to love for San Francisco, and Xavier Legette, the local South Carolina native, going to the Carolina Panthers. And then, the top of the second round, Coleman, Ladd McConkey with the Chargers, trading up with New England, who they themselves take a receiver in Jalen Polk out of Washington. It's a group that, kind of all clustered together. Not all of them are going to work out, but Nick, the player and the fit of those that I mentioned that you are most excited to see on the football field. We're not going to talk winners and losers and grades because that's not realistic football discussion.
Well, one of the guys I was very interested in his selection, you didn't even mention, and he was taken, I believe, in the 3rd round because there was a slew of Michigan guys taken 19, 20, 20.
You're a Roman Wilson guy, huh?
Yeah, I think Roman Wilson definitely fits well with what Arthur Smith wants to do with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, look, they have Is it Van Jefferson?
Van Jefferson,
yes.
Wes Watkins, and
George Pickens.
Calvin
and then they have Denzel Mims there, and they have Firemouth. So they definitely have some weapons, and you throw in Cordell Patterson. So the Steelers quietly have tried to get back to what they have been known to be in the past, because when you think about the times when Big Ben was there, they always had 3 good wide receivers or 3 decent wide receivers and a tight end. So whether it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, who's a starting quarterback, those guys are going to be in the perfect situation. Now, let's go back to the Kansas City Chiefs and Xavier Worthy.
Okay.
For me, even though Worthy is more on the slim side, and some kind of criticize that, the one thing I see that the Kansas City Chiefs are trying to do, they're trying to replicate Tyreek Hill, right? They thought they were going to get that with Mecole Hardman, but Hardman never really gave that back to them. So the whole idea, if Xavier Worthy can take the top off the defense and just kind of scare the bejesus out of individuals, then it's going to help the wide receiver core and allow Patrick Mahomes to operate underneath. Just think about, let's go back and say, well, what it was like when Tyreek Hill was a part of that offense. I can tell you because I coached against it. The DBs were solely afraid because you couldn't play zone against him. You couldn't play press against him because he got one step on you. If he's even, he's leaving. So that's what the Brett Veach and the Kansas City Chiefs basically are trying to do. They're trying to replicate that same mojo that they had. And I know before they said, well, losing Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins, it wasn't a major blow. That's a lie. they're lying to themselves. And that's why they made this particular move. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the first thing I want to look at is, will Worthy outrun Mahomes' passes, or will Mahomes be able to get the ball past Worthy and say, well, he overthrew him? So that's going to be fascinating to watch.
It'll be like Tua throwing a Tyreek Hill and those first highlight reels that the Dolphins were putting out on social during OTAs. And it looks like Tyreek was slowing down to Tua throwing like that. I can't wait. Chiefs, by the way, adding Kingsley Suamataia at the end of the second round, trading up a spot. Much to the chagrin of my Patriots, who ended up having to reach for a tackle of their own because we saw a run. I love what the Ravens did with Nate Wiggins in the first round and Roger Rosengarten at the bottom of the second round, and they finished things in round 3 with Adisa Isaac, the linebacker out of Penn State. They're just checking off, guys that they lost in free agency. You certainly can't replace their defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, now in Seattle, and their position coaches joining him. But what they have been able to do is add speed to combat what the Chiefs had done, their AFC Championship opponents. But Nate Wiggins is just their type of player. And what I love about Roger Rosengarten is a guy who slid up draft boards late in the process, is that when Michael Penix committed to transfer to Washington, they identified Rosengarten to switch. He was a depth tackle playing on the left side. They say, we want you to go to the right side and be Penix's blind side protector. And he absolutely stood to that occasion, a reason why Washington was named the top offensive line in college football last year. So we still have 4 more rounds to cover, Nick, and we're certainly going to do that once things are wrapped up. There's going to be still plenty of talented players on the board, and you're going to find your Amon-Ra St. Browns in round 4. You're going to find your Thomas Edward Patrick Brady's in the 6th. You just have to. It's a guarantee, right? No.
No, it's not.
But you obviously can find a Nick Ferguson type of 10-year player that's undrafted as well. So, Nick, before we split, we are certainly going to come back once this NFL draft wraps up. But my favorite discussion that we have that I ask of you this time every year, Nick, advice for a player that is expecting to go. We saw this from A.D. Mitchell, right? Adonai Mitchell falling 52 to the Colts, and he said he was pissed off. And shout out Chris Ballard, the GM, for asking, people to put their effing names on it for people that were talking about his character. It was shades of Mike Gundy's "I'm a man, I'm 40." But Nick, your message for any player in this NFL draft that is expecting their name to be called, and it isn't. That was something that you experienced coming out of Georgia Tech. And not only did you not start in the NFL, you played overseas, you played in Canada, and you then went on to play 10 years in the National Football League. It's not over just because your name isn't called on draft night.
No, it isn't. To me, that's kind of when the journey officially starts. Everyone wants to be drafted. But the way I look at it, it's not when you go, it's where you go. And once you get your foot in the door, you have to make sure that you get both feet in. And sometimes that means you have to have that chip on your shoulder. You have to attack everything aggressively. I'm not saying that you have to go in and just be angry all the time, but every time you touch the field, you have to look at the person across from you. You have to look at the organization that you're currently playing for and say, well, you guys did not really take a chance on me. I just fell to you when I fell to you as an undrafted player. So I'm going to make everyone who doubted me eat their words, but I'm also going to make you eat your own words. And for me, I took that so literal that there were times where I even hurt my own teammates, and out of that certain level of frustration. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying, like Tom Brady and so many others before him, keep that chip on your shoulders. Make sure that no matter how long you play with that memory of what they did, or more importantly, what they didn't do to put you in a situation to make your climb that much more difficult.
He's Nick Ferguson. I'm Alex Hardy. We're thrilled. This is the NFL draft. We've got so much more to bring to you. You can follow us, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us on YouTube. And we're going to be back when we have 7 rounds in the books, from pick number 1, Caleb Williams, to Mr. Irrelevant, pick number 257, to the New York Jets, Nick Ferguson's former team. So until next time, Nick, what do you have to say for the people?
Hey, go out there, have fun. Hopefully your team continues to make life-changing decisions so you don't have to be frustrated. But just remember this, at the end of the year, only one team hoists up the trophy. Hopefully it's your team.